Nobody mourned the dead. Every quiet green cemetery, every marble headstone across America traces back to a terrifying survival instinct. Millions of peaceful graves exist today. More respect for a corpse than at any point in history. Nobody planned a single ritual. The earliest humans who stood over a fallen companion felt absolutely no grief. They looked down, saw a fresh resource, and took out their stone blades. They moved on. Deep inside the Moula-Guercy cave system in France, 1999, researchers stepped into the freezing dark of the earth. They found a perfectly preserved snapshot of the late Ice Age. Bone fragments scattered everywhere across the dirt. Animal remains littered the ancient cavern floor. Reindeer, red deer, and wild horses. Then the scientific team looked closer. Some bones stood out from the massive animal pile. Neanderthal remains. They gathered the fossils and brought them into the harsh light of modern laboratories. The Goyet cave in Belgium revealed the exact same nightmare in 2016. A terrifying pattern emerged from the scientific data. Researchers examined the human femurs under high-powered microscopes. They found deep, straight scratches across the surface. Artificial cuts made by razor-sharp flint blades. The exact same stone tools used to butcher local wildlife. Human ribs were violently snapped open. Skulls crushed inward by heavy, blunt force. The incisions were perfectly precise, utterly deliberate, coldly calculated. Stone blades scraped skin away from muscle before stripping muscle away from bone. Tendons severed with brutal, surgical efficiency. The scientists slowly realized the chilling truth of their excavation. They were not standing inside an ancient tomb. They were standing inside a primitive slaughterhouse. Survival in the frozen European wasteland demanded absolute, unforgiving ruthlessness. Starvation meant extinction, making meat simply meat. The species of the carcass did not matter. Relentless hunger completely erased the boundary between human and prey. A fallen tribe member was no longer a friend or a brother. He was immediate sustenance. The rigorous analysis detailed the gruesome biological reality. Thigh bones cracked completely in half. Long bones shattered precisely at their weakest stress points. The damage was not caused by wild animal teeth. It was caused by heavy stone hammers wielded by human hands. The goal was entirely nutritional. Bone marrow, the most calorie-dense, life-saving substance available in the prehistoric tundra. Ancient humans needed extreme fat reserves to survive the brutal freezing winters. They extracted that fat from slaughtered reindeer. They extracted that exact same fat from each other. They even repurposed the leftover human bones. They used them as makeshift tools to sharpen new flint blades, utilitarian objects manufactured directly from the ribs and femurs of their own kind. Absolutely nothing went to waste. No tears were shed over the remains. No markers left behind. The abstract concept of mourning simply did not exist in the freezing dirt of Goya. Empathy was an evolutionary luxury early hominids could not yet afford. The dead held absolutely no spiritual value. They held only raw nutritional value. The horrific physical evidence from these European caves permanently rewrote our understanding of early human psychology. It established a brutally dark baseline for our ancestors before the invention of religion, before the concept of ceremony, before the very first pang of human grief. A fresh corpse was just basic biology, waiting to be consumed. The harsh scientific reality echoed through the thousands of shattered bone fragments. Bodies weren't buried, they were processed. But this savage efficiency could not last forever in the timeline of human evolution. Something fundamental slowly shifted deep inside the prehistoric mind. The butchering eventually stopped. A new, far darker gathering of the dead began. Imagine hiking deep in the Appalachian Mountains. You discover a narrow, jagged sinkhole hidden in the forest. You peer over the edge, pure, suffocating blackness. Now imagine climbing down a rope into that void and realizing the floor is not made of limestone. It is made entirely of human skulls. That is the exact psychological terror of a site in Atapuerca, Spain. The locals call it Sima de los Huesos, the pit of bones. For decades, modern archaeologists navigated this subterranean nightmare. To reach the site, researchers crawled through half a mile of agonizingly tight rock tubes. Oxygen levels dropped. The walls closed in. Then, the cavern floor simply vanished. A 13-meter vertical shaft plunging straight down into the earth. At the bottom lay a tiny, sealed chamber. No natural light had touched this room for nearly 500,000 years. The scientific team rappelled down the blindingly dark chimney. They began to dig. The data published in the journal Science in 2014 shattered previous assumptions. 6,000 human bone fragments, 28 distinct individuals, men, women, teenagers, and toddlers, all Homo heidelbergensis, piled directly on top of each other, rotting together in the damp, freezing dark 430,000 years ago. Rigorous geological analysis ruled out a natural disaster. There was no cave-in. No flash flood washed the victims down the shaft. Carnivore tooth marks on the bones occurred long after death, proving predatory animals did not drag the bodies here. There was only one chillingly logical conclusion. The corpses were deliberately carried through the pitch-black cave system, dragged to the edge of the abyss, and intentionally dropped into the void, one by one, over generations. This represented a massive psychological leap in human evolution. The dead were no longer viewed as a caloric resource. They were no longer butchered for marrow. They were gathered, isolated, removed entirely from the living world. Perhaps it was primitive sanitation, a ruthless, calculated way to keep rotting flesh away from the campsite and avoid attracting predators. A biological disposal system, just throwing out the trash. Then the dirt shifted. The researchers brushed away the heavy, wet clay. A single foreign object emerged among the 6,000 shattered human fragments. A hand axe, not made from common gray flint, carved from incredibly rare pink quartz, flawlessly symmetrical, completely unblemished. Microscopic analysis proved it had never been used to cut meat. It had never struck bone. It was manufactured miles away, brought into the suffocating dark, and intentionally dropped down the shaft alongside the corpses. The scientific team named it Excalibur, the first undeniable symbol of a funeral rite, a conscious offering to the dead. The purely physical act of dumping a rotting body had just crossed the threshold into a spiritual ceremony. The psychological barrier was broken, but dropping a body down a bottomless pit is still fundamentally an act of separation, an act of fear. True grief had not yet materialized in the human mind. That required a radically different kind of connection, and a controversial skeleton buried halfway across the world was about to change the entire definition of human sorrow. 1957. The Zagros Mountains of northern Iraq. An American archaeologist stepped into the blinding dust of Shanidar Cave. His name was Ralph Selecki. Born in New York, educated at Columbia University, a researcher carrying the prestigious weight of the Smithsonian Institution, he had traded the roaring, concrete grid of Manhattan for the silent, unforgiving prehistoric Earth. He came looking for primitive tools. He uncovered a profound psychological mystery. Deep inside the excavation trench, Selecki's brush cleared away the dirt. A crushed skeleton emerged, an adult male Neanderthal, officially designated as Shanidar 4, dead for at least 60,000 to 75,000 years. The physical remains were an incredible find, but the true discovery was invisible to the naked eye. Soil samples were carefully packaged, shipped back to laboratories, placed under high magnification microscopes. The results defied logic. The dirt immediately surrounding the corpse was saturated with pollen, not random wind-blown dust. Massive, concentrated clusters of microscopic spores. Yarrow, blue cornflower, St. Barnaby's thistle. Bright, vibrant, medicinal spring flowers. Selecki published his groundbreaking theory in the journal Science in 1975. The conclusion fundamentally altered human history. This was no longer a brutal survival story. This was a funeral. A grieving tribe walking through the harsh prehistoric landscape, hand-picking colorful blossoms, deliberately laying their fallen brother on a woven bed of spring flowers before covering him with earth. The savage, cannibalistic image of the Neanderthal instantly vanished, replaced by a portrait of deep, recognizable sorrow. The exact same impulse that drives modern Americans to leave floral bouquets at a loved one's grave today. The Shanidar flower burial became legendary. The narrative held tight for decades. A beautiful, comforting prehistoric story. Then modern technology tore it apart. 2023. The Journal of Human Evolution published a ruthless reevaluation. A new generation of scientists examined the microscopic evidence. They scrutinized the tight clustering of the pollen grains. They analyzed the specific plant species. The harsh, unromantic truth surfaced. The flowers were not gathered by mourning hominids. They were introduced by nature. Burrowing rodents tunneling into the cave walls, or nesting solitary bees carrying heavy loads of pollen down into the ancient dirt. The beautiful funeral wreath was an illusion, a biological accident, a trick played by time and insects. The romantic story shattered, but the science left one unbreakable fact in its wake. Remove the flowers. Remove the poetic interpretation. The physical body of Shanidar IV was still intentionally placed, tucked carefully into a natural depression in the rock, safe from hungry scavengers, positioned with absolute, deliberate care. The raw intention was undeniably real. Our ancient cousins were grappling with the concept of mortality. They were trying to honor the dead. But Neanderthals were a separate branch, a different lineage entirely, the absolute perfection of grief, the devastating, familiar heartbreak that defines our own modern humanity. That exact emotion had not yet crystallized in the fossil record. To see the true birth of human mourning, the cameras had to shift focus, away from the Middle East, away from Neanderthals. A new discovery waited deep in the African continent, and it involved a 3-year-old child. The ultimate psychological threshold was finally crossed on the eastern coast of Africa. In 2021, the journal Nature published a monumental discovery from the dense tropical environment of the Panga ya Saidi cave in Kenya. Researchers excavating the deep ancient sediment layers uncovered a shallow, deliberately scooped circular trench. Inside this tiny excavated pit lay the fragile, disintegrating remains of a 3-year-old boy. The scientific team named him Mtoto, a local word simply meaning child. He died approximately 78,000 years ago in the quiet shadows of the cavern. The physical arrangement of his tiny skeleton revealed something entirely unprecedented in the human archaeological record. The child was not casually discarded in the dirt or left exposed to hungry scavengers. He was carefully and intentionally positioned, lying on his right side. His small knees were gently drawn up tightly toward his chest in a restful sleeping posture. The fragile skull was perfectly tilted and suspended slightly above the hard floor of the grave. The unnatural angle proved his head originally rested on a supportive cushion made of perishable material. It was a soft pillow of woven leaves or animal hide that had long since rotted away into the earth. This meticulous, heartbreaking arrangement fundamentally separated early Homo sapiens from every primitive ancestor that came before them. The brutal, unforgiving pragmatism of the freezing European caves was entirely gone. These ancient African hunter-gatherers did not view the small, lifeless body as a convenient biological resource. There were no violent stone tool marks scraping across these delicate bones. There was absolutely no savage extraction of marrow for prehistoric survival. The tribe had expended their precious physical energy not to butcher a corpse, but to fiercely protect it. They carefully shrouded the boy, provided him with a comfortable resting place, and sealed him safely beneath the earth. The undeniable tenderness of the physical act proved a massive cognitive revolution had permanently occurred in the human brain. For the very first time in our history, the living looked at the dead and recognized a profound, irreplaceable emotional loss. The abstract concept of a person successfully survived the biological failure of the physical body. Genuine human mourning had officially entered the fossil record forever. The primitive slaughterhouses of our earliest ancestors were finally replaced by the solemn, quiet dignity of the grave. The brutal evolution was finally complete. The horrific cannibalism of the frozen European caves was entirely abandoned. The terrifying, bottomless bone pits of Spain were left behind. Humanity had painstakingly learned to mourn. We stopped destroying the dead. We started preserving them. We built the quiet, peaceful cemeteries that exist across America today. But the dark history of human anatomy did not end there. Our ancestors stopped butchering each other for survival. Yet centuries later, we engineered far more sophisticated ways to tear the human body apart. Click here. The absolute worst medieval torture devices ever designed.